Changsheng told them that there was no curfew in Red Candle Town. There was also a street market on the west side of town, and even though it was small, it still contained everything that one would need. All kinds of goods and trinkets could be found there. After learning that Chen Ping'an and the others needed to buy necessities for their journey to the academy, Changsheng volunteered to act as their guide and show them around. He said that this would save them a lot of trouble. At the very least, the merchants wouldn't dare to raise their prices to extortionate levels. Chen Ping'an looked toward Aoyang, who had been here once, and the man with the bamboo hat responded with a nod. He said that he was only familiar with the area around the two banks, and that he had never been to this street market before. Changsheng looked at Aoyang, and the two experienced men shared a knowing smile. There were close to 100 decorated boats in Fu Inlet, and they were all of varying shapes and sizes. They would row out from the inlet each night, and they would follow the river and enter Red Candle Town. After making a trip around the town, the decorated boats would then return to Fu Inlet. During this time, men would continuously board these decorated boats to buy both wine and women. Even though the boat hostesses and prostitutes in Red Candle Town were all lowly citizens of the Great Li Empire, the former were directly managed by the capital's Imperial Music Office one. In fact, even the local county magistrates didn't have the right to raise the status of these boat hostesses and elevate them to ordinary citizens. Thus, there was a widespread rumor in Red Candle Town that the ancestors of these women were once imperial family members and meritorious officials of the Divine Water Nation. Following the guidance of the local official Changsheng, Chen Ping'an and the others headed toward the market located on the west side of town. The further west they walked, the more lively and boisterous it became. After learning that there were towns and relay stations all along the 100-kilometer stretch of river passage toward the south, Chen Ping'an abandoned his thoughts of buying all their supplies here. He didn't overstock on rice or cured meat or any other foods. However, he still purchased many medicinal ingredients and ointments from a pharmacy that they passed. This was to treat colds, heat strokes, scrapes, and other minor issues. Only when it came time to pay did Chen Ping'an finally notice the difference between his hometown and Red Candle Town. As it turned out, an entire tael of silver was an extremely rare item. Thus, Chen Ping'an decided to exchange the two snow-patterned silver taels for the commonly used copper coins in the Great Li Empire, heavenly brilliance ingots. Because his silver taels were of superior quality, just the premium he was paid alone reached a whopping 200 copper coins. This caused Chen Ping'an to feel extremely grateful to Yuan Xiu. Because the relay station deputy was with them, their trip to the market was especially smooth sailing. One truly couldn't treat an informal official as if they weren't an official. This was especially the case since Changsheng was someone who frequently interacted with traveling officials and influential businessmen. In the eyes of the commoners in the small town, such a person was naturally a mighty and omnipotent being. Thus, the shopkeepers that Chen Ping'an and the others came across all respectfully and politely referred to him as Lord Chang. It was as if they wanted to treat him as a bodhisattva. Li Huai was extremely reserved the entire time, and he only dared to hide behind Aoyang's back and occasionally poke his head out from time to time. Aoyang teased him and called him a chicken who only dared to act aggressively at home. Li Huai was just about to scream and argue with Aoyang for a good while, but when he saw the curious glances cast over by the passers-by, he immediately lowered his head and followed behind Aoyang in a listless manner. Aoyang was extremely humored by this, and he occasionally smacked Li Huai on the head. The little boy was infuriated, but he didn't dare to explode in anger. This was as suffocating as could be. Meanwhile, Lin Shui continued to act in an aloof manner. Since these things had nothing to do with him, he naturally wouldn't poke his nose into it for no reason. He would presumably remain the same even when he went to the capital in the future. Only Li Baoping walked with her head held high and her chest puffed out as she carried her green bamboo bookcase. It was as if she wanted to drag the passers-by over and flaunt her bookcase to them, telling them that it had been personally made by her junior uncle. The street market consisted of two main streets running north to south, and after strolling down Mountain Viewing Street, Chen Ping'an and the others walked into an alley and headed toward the parallel river viewing street. However, when they passed a quiet bookstore in the alley, Chen Ping'an came to a stop even though Changsheng continued to walk forward. He notified Changsheng before turning to Li Baoping and the two other children and saying with a smile, "You three can buy a book each." It doesn't matter how expensive it is, as long as I can afford it. The bookstore was very small, with the store face only measuring 6 meters in width. After entering, they saw that there were only 2 tall shelves on either side of the store. At the other end of the store, there sat a young man dressed in a black changshan. His legs were crossed, and he was resting with his eyes closed. There was also a folded fan in his hand, and he lightly tapped it against his palm as he hummed a tune. This young store owner had a handsome yet effeminate appearance. However, he didn't smell like copper like the other merchants and store owners that they had come across before. Zhu Lu immediately faltered upon seeing him. She most likely hadn't expected to come across such a refined and outstanding person in the street market of a small town. Even though the mountain lord of Go Table Mountain had recovered his appearance as a mountain god after breaking free from his shackles, transforming from a short old man into a tall and handsome young man, Zhu Lu's impression of him was still dominated by his initially disheveled and deplorable appearance. Meanwhile, her first impression of this young store owner was the complete opposite. Even Zhuhei was astonished and puzzled. Perhaps this person was from a declining clan or sect. After all, he appeared no inferior to the 2 young masters of the Li clan. The young man didn't open his eyes, and he informed them in a lazy voice, "No haggling is allowed for the books in my store. Whether you benefit from the books or not is all up to your own observation abilities. This bookstore is relatively famous in Red Candle Town," Changsheng explained to Zhuhei. "Scholars who pass our town often like to visit this store. However, the store owner is quite eccentric, and he sells his books for much higher than market value. He also dares to directly kick people out of his store. He's an aloof person who doesn't care about his customers' status." One time, an official of the Ministry of Revenue was traveling undercover, and he chose to stay at this underling's pillow relay station. He took a fancy to a book with only one existing copy or whatnot, and he simply tried to shave 50 taels of silver off the asking price of 300. However, he was immediately kicked out of the store without being shown any mercy. This caused him to lose face, and he was so angry that he still hadn't calmed down when he arrived back at the relay station. In fact, he almost ordered the county office to shut down this small bookstore. However, he eventually let this matter go, and I presume it's because he didn't want to gain a bad reputation because of this. Zhuhei nodded in understanding. This person was most likely a Confucian scholar who stubbornly followed the rules and didn't understand how to properly interact with people. Second young master always liked to ridicule these people and describe them as one who calmly discusses philosophy during times of peace, yet can only use death to prove loyalty during times of calamity. 3. The second young master had also smiled and said that the Great Li Empire would become the same way within 200 years. As a result, Zhuhei had an innate dislike for scholars. The post road that passed through Red Candle Town was one of the 3 main post roads that led from the southern regions of the Great Li Empire to the capital. Relatively wealthy merchants and officials who wanted to travel north and visit the capital, as well as other major cities, often liked to pick this post road. Even though the 2 other post roads were wider, the relay stations along the way were always stuffy and filled to the brim. If one wasn't powerful or influential enough, they wouldn't be able to enter these relay stations, much less find a room to stay in. Each year, many officials and wealthy merchants would lose face and suffer humiliation because they weren't aware of this situation. Meanwhile, scholars who were traveling to the capital to take the imperial examination also liked to pick this post road, and this was because they were yet to become officials. They often traveled in groups of 2 or 3, and this allowed them to both take care of each other as well as enjoy the scenery and adventures together. As for the frustrated officials who were banished to the south, they often liked to come up with poems and scribble them on the walls of the rooms that they were staying in. These officials also liked to take the post road that passed through Red Candle Town. In this way, the walls in the rooms of Pillow Relay Station were filled with the frustrated and lamenting words of scholars and officials. Li Baoping craned her neck and started to look for a suitable book. She glanced here and there, and there was no pattern to where she was looking. It was all done on a whim. She would occasionally pull out a book and randomly flip through a few pages, putting it back if it didn't catch her interest. In the end, the little girl picked a travel journal that cost 300 copper coins. She was a bit reluctant to spend so much, but she had truly taken a liking to this book. She turned around to look at her junior uncle, who smiled and nodded in encouragement. Lin Shui's gaze slowly swept across the bookshelf in an orderly manner. He was scanning the bookshelf from left to right and from top to bottom. Each time he retrieved a book, he would definitely start reading it from the title page. After flipping through a few books, he eventually settled on a feng shui book that didn't credit an author. This book cost 400 copper coins, and Chen Ping'an also agreed to Lin Shui's request with a nod. After entering the bookstore and escaping the crowded and noisy streets, Li Huai immediately returned to his naughty, mischievous old self. He was like a wild horse who had broken free of its leash. Because he was the youngest and shortest, he stubbornly insisted on sitting on Aoyang's shoulders to pick his book. Aoyang agreed to Li Huai's request, but he threatened to abandon him on the streets afterward if he didn't pick a book to buy. In the end, Li Huai mustered his courage and picked a brand new book sitting at the highest location on the shelf. This book cost 9 taels and 2 coins, and upon seeing this price, Li Huai tried to sneakily put the book away in fright. However, his clumsy and hurried movements resulted in him failing to stuff the book back. Instead, the book fell to the floor with a thud. The young store owner opened his eyes and glanced at the book on the floor before snapping. "You damage it, you buy it. The newest edition of Severed Watercliff. 9 taels and 2 coins. Li Huai didn't dare to talk back to a stranger, so he could only put on a mopey face and carefully look at Chen Ping'an. "Will you read it if I buy it?" Chen Ping'an asked. Li Huai nodded vigorously. Chen Ping'an smiled and said, "Then I'll buy it for you." "Chen Ping'an, aren't you going to buy a book for yourself?" Aoyang asked. The paying Chen Ping'an hurriedly shook his head and replied, "I can barely recognize any characters still, so what's the point of buying a book?" Zhuhou turned to his daughter and asked, "Are there any books you want to buy?" Zhu Lu had been standing at the entrance of the bookstore the entire time. She took a sideways glance at the 2 bookshelves and shook her head. The young store owner who was about to accept Chen Ping'an's payment stood up. His hair was held by an ebony hairpin, and the folded fan in his hand was bone white in color. His gaze wandered past the little girl in red and the aloof young boy, eventually settling on the little boy who was timidly holding the book titled Severed Watercliff. There was an amused smile on his face. Aoyang cracked a grin. After leaving the bookstore, Chen Ping'an and the others walked toward River Viewing Street. Zhuhou sensed something and looked back, only to see the remarkable-looking young man leaning against the doorway and farewelling them with his gaze. After catching Zhuhi's gaze, he even smiled and nodded in acknowledgement. Zhuhou turned back and furrowed his brows. After leaving the small alley, he hurriedly walked up beside Aoyang and asked, "Senior Aoyang, is there something strange about that store owner?" Aoyang fixed his bamboo hat and offered a genuinely strange response, saying, "Compared to him, the true troubles still lie ahead of us. However, it doesn't have anything to do with you guys." The water in rushing tranquil river was the most turbulent, and this river was filled with hidden reefs and dangerous shoals as well as peculiar sights that were renowned in the official courts. In one section of the river, there were numerous stone columns of varying sizes poking out of the water, and this was referred to by the people as bamboo shoots sprouting in spring. Only small and nimble boats could weave through this maze of stone columns, with large ships finding it much more difficult to navigate. Even boatmen who had grown up by the rivers didn't dare to recklessly paddle their boats across this river. In fact, they would only dare to do so if they were paid a huge sum by refined scholars and literati who had come here after hearing of its reputation. Thus, there was also the saying, "Boat like thin paper, boatman like iron." Each year, a number of boatmen and outsiders would lose their lives attempting to navigate through the stone forest in this section of rushing tranquil river. Tonight, many people were touring on rushing tranquil river. The violent river water smashed against the protruding stone columns, yet there was a man sitting atop one of these columns with his chest and belly exposed. He lightly tossed an empty wine jar into the river. Beside him, there were still 3 unopened wine jars. In the distance, a speck of red light drew closer and closer. As it turned out, this was a hunchbacked old man with a large red lantern in his hand. Using the stone columns as footholds, he lightly and gracefully bounded over like a dragonfly skimming the surface of the water. A powerful figure suddenly descended from the sky and landed on a stone column. The stone column instantly exploded into pieces, unable to withstand his forceful landing. However, the person remained standing in the river just like that. Elsewhere, A middle-aged woman walked over against the flow of the river in a relaxed manner. There was a snow-white and fist-sized pearl floating 1 meter above her head, and it was radiating with a brilliant glow that illuminated the entire bottom of the river, making it appear as if it were day. She said in a lazy and bored voice, "I walked an entire 50 kilometers through this river, yet I didn't manage to find a single piece of treasure. Who told me there were valuable things to be found here?" The man who was drinking atop a stone column glanced down into the bottom of the river and said indifferently, "Our Lord has already arrived in Red Candle Town." The old man swayed his red lantern and chuckled in a hoarse voice. "The Lord has actually come by himself? Then why did he need the 4 of us to come? To sit here and cheer for him?" The man drank a mouthful of wine and replied solemnly, "Hopefully that's the case." After strolling down River Viewing Street, they managed to purchase all of the necessities that they needed. Chen Ping'an was just about to leave, but Aoyang unexpectedly suggested that they take a boat and enjoy the night scenery on the rushing tranquil river. Few people were interested, and only Lin Shuyi nodded in agreement. Chen Ping'an didn't mind taking a look at this dangerous stretch of water, after placing everything back in their rooms at the relay station. However, Li Baoping tugged his sleeve, and Chen Ping'an immediately understood her intention. He weighed the pouch of coins in his hand, and there were enough loose copper coins to buy some Donghua. Zhu Lu dragged her father away to visit some weapon shops. Meanwhile, Li Huai complained that he was hungry, so Aoyang told Chang Sheng to take him back to Pillow Relay Station for a late-night snack. Chen Ping'an and the others split up. Lin Shuyi walked beside Aoyang and he asked in a soft voice, "Senior, you said that Li Huai was the most fortunate. Is that seemingly new Severed Water Cliff book the most valuable?" Aoyang nodded lightly and revealed, "It only looks new. In reality, however, it's already been around for quite some years. The contents of the book aren't worth anything though. And it's just some random nonsense about water element cultivation techniques. This is to purposely trick others. However, the material of the book is relatively valuable, and the book won't be attacked by insects even after being placed somewhere for a few hundred years." Aoyang untied the small gourd from his waist and took a gulp of wine before continuing. "Also, if my eyes didn't deceive me, a few silverfish have already taken residence in that book. Of course, you guys wouldn't have been able to see them with your naked eyes. These silverfish are a type of mystical spirit, and they're incredibly small insects that like to swim around words and characters like fish like to swim around corals. Silverfish feed on the essence and spirit contained within words, and after maturing, they'll grow no thicker than the width of a hair. Numerous types of silverfish exist in the world, and the silverfish in Li Huai's book can only be considered ordinary. However, if the book is sold to an official or noble who takes great interest in peculiar matters, I presume it will command at least 3,000 taels of silver. In this sense, it was one of the most valuable books in that bookstore." Lin Shuyi was speechless with astonishment. These were silverfish that couldn't be seen, yet they could command a price of at least 3,000 taels of silver? Perhaps money was the most worthless thing in the world beyond their hometown? Aoyang saw through his thoughts and he chuckled. "When you truly enter the path of cultivation in the future, you'll understand that gold and silver are things that will flow like water. Even if you have mountains of them, you'll find that you can spend it all with a single snap of your fingers. However, since it's necessary to spend exorbitant amounts of gold and silver, this also reflects that such lowly matters are indeed quite valuable." Lin Shuyi nodded in understanding. Aoyang smiled and said, "If it were Chen Ping'an, he might not understand such a principle." Lin Shuyi shook his head and replied, "Since this relates to money, I'm sure that he'll definitely understand it." Aoyang roared with laughter. He arrived at the bustling banks of the river with Lin Shuyi, and the young boy was feeling slightly uncomfortable. He had already grown accustomed to the peaceful and cool night of his hometown. This was especially the case each time he took a breath and inhaled the fragrance of perfumes and powders. These smells had seemed fragrant in the beginning, yet after smelling them for a while, he couldn't help but find them a little nauseating. After exiting the alley and arriving at the banks, their field of view immediately opened up. Blue stone slabs lined the two sides of the river, and the pleasant chatter and silvery laughs of young women traveled through the air. Many beautiful women were leaning against the rails of the tall buildings, showing off their pale white and supple arms. Most of them were wearing bright red or bright green dresses, and under the illumination of the hanging lanterns, These young women appeared even more charming and seductive. Decorated boats of all shapes and sizes gently flowed down the river. Bamboo curtains were lowered over the cabins, and most of the decorated boats had a young woman sitting on each end of the boat. In addition to them, there was also a young woman to row the boat. In contrast to the seductive women who were openly soliciting business from the balconies of the tall buildings, the young women on the decorated boats appeared more refined and gentle, even though they were also dressed in a revealing manner. Those who were younger appeared much like the friendly girl from next door, while those who were older appeared like the noble daughters of influential clans. From time to time, the women in the tall buildings would ridicule and taunt the boat hostesses who were competing with them for business, even going as far as to throw fruit and vegetable scraps at them. However, the boat hostesses were already accustomed to this, and most of them didn't pay any heed to these vulgar acts. Unless they were hit, they rarely ever glowered back and argued with these women. When conflict did inevitably occur between the women, however, they would definitely draw shouts of encouragement from the spectating men who reveled in the chaos. Lin Shui felt tense and uneasy, and he asked, "Senior Aoyang, didn't you say we were going to boat down rushing tranquil river to enjoy the night scenery? Since this is the meeting point of 3 rivers, this section of the river can naturally be regarded as part of rushing tranquil river as well," Aoyang replied in a deliberately dishonest manner. Lin Shui was rendered speechless. Aoyang squatted down on the bank of the river and gazed at the decorated boats that slowly drifted past. Each time a boat hostess made eyes at him or greeted him in a mellow voice, he would lift his small gourd and silently gulp down a mouthful of wine, muttering to himself in a quiet voice. Lin Shui squatted beside him and pricked his ears to listen to what Aoyang was muttering. He could vaguely make out some mentions of "keep myself as pure as jade," "I'm a gentleman," "charming beauties make men fall," and so on. Lin Shui held in a laugh. As it turned out, Senior Aoyang was faring no better than him. Aoyang turned his head a little to look at a decorated boat nearby. An ordinary-looking woman was sitting at the front of the boat, and she was boldly looking around. She didn't look like she was selling her services, and she instead looked like a noblewoman who was sightseeing on the river. Meanwhile, the teenage girl who was standing behind her and rowing the boat appeared delicate and charming. Aoyang stood up and waited for the decorated boat to pass by. When it approached them, he suddenly took out a dazzling gold ingot and asked, "Is this enough?" The woman wore a gentle smile, but she neither nodded nor shook her head. The teenage girl was stunned, and she felt a strong urge to accept this offer for the woman. The woman's gaze bypassed Aoyang and landed on the young boy behind him. She pointed at him and said, "This young master can board the boat alone." Aoyang hurriedly put the gold ingot away and exclaimed, "This brat is a piss poor. He's got no money. He's absolutely penniless. I can let him board for free," the woman said in a gentle voice. The teenage girl looked in the direction that the woman was pointing, and what she saw was a young boy whose face was bright red with embarrassment. His lips were full and his teeth were sparkling, and his demeanor was one of grace and sophistication. A shy smile spread across her face. The pitiful man in the bamboo hat was cast aside even though he was offering a huge sum of money. His face was filled with incredulity. Was this woman blind? Or were her standards that high? She was refusing a man in his prime as handsome and dashing as him? And she was instead interested in the stick-thin Lin Shui? If he followed this logic, then wouldn't she be offering them taels of silver instead if he dragged Chun Ping'an over? How upsetting! Aoyang murmured. The woman smiled as she looked at Lin Shui. For some reason, there was an aura of charm and seductiveness exuding from this ordinary-looking woman. "You're not going to board?" she asked. Lin Shui shook his head in reply. Aoyang sat on the stairs and downed a mouthful of wine in sorrow. "Brat, hurry up and board the boat. The worst thing that can happen is that you won't be able to drink from my gourd anymore. What wine in the world can beat flour? Well, you mustn't let this opportunity slip away." Lin Shui remained unmoving. However, he rolled his eyes at the back of the man. The decorated boat had no option but to keep moving forward. They were being urged to move on by the boat hostesses behind them. The woman looked back and flashed a smile at the young boy. Lin Shui was unfazed, and his expression remained cold as he locked eyes with her. Decorated boats continued to sail by, and voluptuous women, slender women, and boat hostesses of all body types drifted past them like a moving painting of beautiful women. Aoyang, were you especially waiting for her? Lin Shui asked softly. Aoyang fixed his bamboo hat before shaking his head and replying with a smile. No, it was just on a whim. I simply wanted to see how far and wide this fishing net has been cast. The young scholar sat down beside him and boldly gazed at the beautiful women. A little child with a basket ran up and down the bluestone path next to the river, loudly peddling his plum blossoms as he ran from one place to another. Zhu wanted to buy a dagger for herself. At the same time as being sharp, she also hoped that this dagger could be better looking. Unexpectedly, however, the weapon shop had already closed for the day. The young girl could only stand there in silence and frustration. We'll come again tomorrow, Zhuhou said, trying to comfort her. Zhu leaned against a hitching post and looked up at the night sky. Something on your mind? Zhuhou asked softly. Zhu shook her head. During the last leg of our journey through Go Table Mountain, young mistress especially asked to take a forest turtle with you. Did she have something to say to you? Zhuhou asked carefully. She told me to be more respectful to the others. Zhu replied in low spirits. Zhuhou breathed a sigh of relief and said with a smile, young mistress isn't wrong. Harmony brings wealth, especially when traveling away from home. So be it if I have to be respectful to Aoyang. After all, he's a member of Wind Snow Temple. Zhu grumbled in a low voice. Even though he looks nothing like the immortals of my imagination, an immortal is an immortal after all. I can tolerate him no matter how detestable he is. However, just who do Lin Shui and Li Huai think they are? Just because they've been classmates with young mistress for a few years, they're acting as if we're all close friends? One is the son of a lowly maidservant, and one is the son of a good-for-nothing man. What right do they have to stand on equal footing with young mistress? Especially that. Seeing that she was unwilling to continue, Zhuhou offered, Chun Ping'an. Zhu pursed her lips. Zhuhou sighed and continued, there are no outsiders here, so what I'm about to say might be a bit grating to the ear. The young girl's face suddenly lit up, and she cut her father off and said, Father, young master especially jotted some notes down for me at the end of his letter to young mistress. Young master's semi-cursive script and regular script too are getting better and better by the day. In any case, he wrote about how he personally hunted down a group of horse thieves with others, and he described the ups and downs during this chase. He said he became acquainted with the eldest son of a meritorious general from the Chan clan, and he also described the scene of beacon towers being lit to signify everything was fine. He described how there are all kinds of peculiar and wonderful things in the capital, and there were actually people riding pythons and celestial cranes as they wandered through the streets. However, the people in the capital were already used to this. Young master also said that there are 2 living door gods at the southern gate of the city, and it's rumored that they were gifts from a Taoist sect when the Great Li Empire was first founded. They're a whopping 15 meters in height. Father, doesn't this sound like fun? Refer to him as second young master. You need to be more careful, Zhuhou said in exasperation. Zhu smiled brightly and retorted, young master isn't here, and he wouldn't care with his simple and honest personality anyway. He wouldn't get angry even if he heard it. Don't be so disrespectful, Zhuhou scolded. Zhu looked down with her lashes trembling slightly. Young master. Ahem, second young master once told us servants that those who are fated for a good life will enjoy good fortune even if they lie down and do nothing. However, those who are fated for a bad life have simply come to this world to endure hardship and suffering. Li Huai is fated for a good life, and so is Lin Shui. By becoming disciples of Mountain Cliff Academy, it's extremely likely that they'll become renowned and influential people in the future. Even if things don't turn out well, they'll at least still become filthy rich nobles. The young girl looked up and continued, as for Chan Ping'an, his life isn't too bad either. At the very least, he doesn't have to refer to others as young mistress or young master. Zhuhou was slightly afraid to catch his daughter's gaze. They were generational servants. Generational because they were servants from birth. Zhuhou wanted to speak, but he didn't know how to respond. There was a firm look in Zhu's eyes as she continued. Father, it's fine. Second young master said that once we arrive in the capital, there'll be a million ways for us to break free from our lowly status. Moreover, The frontline army of the Great Li Empire is willing to recruit female martial artists. If I make outstanding contributions, perhaps I'll even receive an honorary title conferred by imperial mandate. Zhuhou looked at his daughter, who seemed a little unfamiliar at this moment. She was glowing with eagerness and positivity, and this made him feel relieved and satisfied. He nodded and concurred. We'll both join the army together then. That way we can also look out for each other. Now that second young master has settled nicely in the capital, we should ask him to find us a nicer army unit to join, one that doesn't face too many harsh challenges and is easy to make contributions in. In any case, we can't bring shame to Dragon Spring County's Li clan before we break free from our shackles as lowly servants. Even when we gain freedom in the future, we still have to remain grateful to the Li clan. The young girl smiled and quickly walked over to loop her arm around her father's. She pulled him back to Pillow Relay Station and teased, "All right, I got it. Father, since when did you become such a chatterbox?" Zhuhou patted his daughter's head. He hesitated for a brief moment before eventually deciding to say, "When you get the chance, you should go and apologize to Chan Ping'an. Regardless of your intention during the battle in Go Table Mountain, the truth of the matter is that you did something wrong. Since you did something wrong, then it's only natural that you should apologize and make up for your mistake." Zhu Lu fell silent. However, perhaps it was because she was in a good mood tonight. She smiled brilliantly and replied, "Okay." There were 2 temples in Red Candle Town, and this was in line with the Great Li Empire's etiquette. There was a Wenchang Pavilion and a Martial Sage Temple, and both were fairly grand in scale. The former honored an official holding a ritual baton, while the latter honored a general in armor with one foot stepping on a leopard cat. The 2 temples were located in the south of Red Candle Town, and they were only a short 500 meters away from each other. Deep into the night, the 2 statues shook at almost the exact same moment, shedding the layer of dust from their bodies. Rings of golden light started to radiate from them. At the same time, the golden clay statues in the temples by the embroidered flower river and the fine wine river also experienced a similar situation. In the Go Table Mountain ranges to the north of Red Candle Town, a bare-chested man held a flagon of wine in his hands. 3 more wine jars were hanging by his waist. Even though he reeked of alcohol and could barely walk in a straight line, each step he took would still cover a surprising 15 meters. It was as if he were walking on flat ground as he traversed the mountain range. He quickly arrived at the peak of Go Table Mountain, and he burped loudly before forcefully stomping on the ground. The mountain lord Wei Bo appeared nearby. The man glanced at the handsome young man who was holding a green bamboo cane, and he chuckled, "Congratulations! How delightful! You finally managed to break free from the restriction and recover your true body. In fact, there's even a chance for you to become a mountain god. By the looks of it, you've encountered a supreme fated opportunity." "Get to the point," Weibo said with a somber expression. The man wiped his mouth and asked directly, "That swordsman called Aoyang, how powerful is he?" Weibo fell silent. "This matter is of utmost importance and I'm not in the mood to dilly-dally with you. I more so don't have the time," the man said calmly. "If you don't want to speak, then I'll shatter your body and not even give you the opportunity to recover. Before answering your question, can you tell me why you're asking this?" Weibo asked. The man nodded and replied, "He killed 2 top-notch warriors of the Great Li Empire, Li Ho, who was at the 7th tier of martial arts, and Hu Yinglin, who was at the 8th tier of cultivation. They were both first-rate elites from Her Majesty's Bamboo Leaf Pavilion." His Majesty was extremely displeased when he learned of this, and he felt like this person broke the rules first. Thus, the Great Li Empire wants to get an explanation from him. A glum expression fell across Weibo's face. The man smiled coldly and continued in a baleful voice, "I encourage you to stay out of this. It's best if you can completely remove yourself from this matter. Otherwise, you might be tossed into the rushing tranquil river to take a bath again. However, I can guarantee you that no one will be willing to risk the disintegration of their body and soul to collect the shards of your body from the bottom of the river again. No one will put your statue back together piece by piece and bring you back to Go Table Mountain. What do you say, the Northern Mountain's formal god of the Divine Water Nation?" Weibo gave a mournful smile. To the border of the Great Li Empire, the gates of Yefu Pass were wide open. The small number of light cavalry stationed at the city decided to march in the dark of night, something they rarely ever did. Even though there were only 1,000 of them, the orderly thud of the warhorses' iron hooves onto the ground still caused the earth to quake. It was as if someone were beating a war drum with vigor and speed. This was a sound that could send ardor and zeal coursing through one's blood. Beside the post road, a general tugged on his reins and brought his horse to a halt. There was a solemn expression on his face. A young lieutenant with a vicious scar on his face hurriedly came over on his horse. After slowing down and stopping next to the general, he asked in a soft voice, "General Han, what's the reason behind this accelerated march toward the north and surprise attack? The Great Li Empire has vast expanses of territory to the north of Yefu Pass, so how can there possibly be large groups of bandits or rogues? Even if there are, the responsibility of dealing with them shouldn't fall on our cavalry unit anyway, right? There are some questions that you shouldn't ask," the stocky general replied in a deep voice. The young lieutenant grimaced in reply. However, he did indeed stop his line of questioning. The general from Yefu Pass hesitated briefly, and this was most likely because he was feeling uncomfortably stifled as well. After organizing his words, he explained quietly, "Not only is our cavalry unit marching north, but almost half of the infantry and cavalry units from the northern border passes and military towns are marching north tonight as well." The young lieutenant faltered upon hearing this. Seasonal hunting that occurs on a 4-year cycle? But this isn't the right season. We only just attended a spring hunting session last year, so even if we're to hold a large military exercise this year, it should be in the summer. The general unconsciously stroked the soft mane of his steed as he replied, "The Ministry of War will naturally give us an order when we arrive at the location. There's no need for us to speculate." More than 100 kilometers to the west of Red Candle Town, there rested a small and lonely mountain in the middle of the wide embroidered flower river. The local residents had a crude name for this mountain that sat upstream, Steamed Bun Mountain. There was a lone temple of the mountain lord on this mountain, and incense and offerings to this temple never ceased. It was said that this temple was extremely efficacious, with people receiving whatever they prayed for: children, wealth, and so on. This brought wide renown to the temple, and it was a landmark that scholars and officials had to take a boat and visit. The spring night was chilly, and the undulating waves in the river sent splashes into the air. One could vaguely make out a green carp that measured a meter in length speedily swimming toward the lone mountain. What was surprising was the fact that there sat a young child in bright red clothes on the back of the fish. This child was only as tall as a palm, and like a horseman holding onto his reins, his hands were tightly gripping onto the 2 whiskers of the green carp. The child bounced up and down with the movements of the carp and river water, and his entire body was soaked. His face was pale, and a string of curses and expletives flowed from his mouth. The green carp suddenly stopped when it reached the shore, causing the child to be ruthlessly launched onto the land. The child took a tumble, covering him in grime. He turned to the green carp that was swimming back to the riverbank in a leisurely manner and roared, "A crooked stick will surely have a crooked shadow. Your owner is a bloody bitch." The carp suddenly turned around to glare at the child on the shore. The latter almost wet his pants in fright, and he shouted, "Good men don't argue with women," before turning around and sprinting to the temple of the mountain lord. The temple was still open, and it took the small child a great deal of effort to climb over the door threshold. After landing inside, he looked up at the funny-looking clay statue that was covered in peeling paint and placed his hands on his hip, shouting, "Your lord almost drowned in the river. Are you not going to hurry up and kneel down to accept my command? Do you think I won't dare to punish you for profound disrespect and chop your head off?" There was a loud thump. The child in red was kicked out of the temple as if he were nothing more than a mere stone. A short man sat on the door threshold and cursed, "An incense boy born in the temple like you actually dares to pretend to be this lord's lord?" The man and child were truly alike. The child was panting in exertion, and he bared his teeth and wore a look of grief as he climbed up to sit on the door threshold with much difficulty. The man frowned and asked, "What's wrong?" "I'm a bit hungry," the child mumbled. The man lifted his hand and pretended that he was going to hit the child, causing the young boy to wrap his arms around his head and exclaim, "I eavesdropped some information from the city god pavilion just then. I heard that the Ministry of Rites and the Ministry of Astronomy issued 2 secret orders, commanding all of the mountain gods and river gods within a 500-kilometer radius of Red Candle Town to await further orders. They're not allowed to leave, and they're not allowed to cultivate in seclusion either. They have to stand by and immediately carry out any orders. If they're absent when called, they'll be given the death penalty. Holy fuck. If it weren't for me telling you this news, you would have been screwed over by someone ages ago with your lazy personality. Someone would have borrowed this knife to kill a person. Oh, I forgot that you're not a person. This time, the small child was smacked and sent flying into the temple. The man stood up and gazed in the direction of Red Candle Town. His expression was solemn, and he told the child, "I left some food in the censer for you. Remember to eat it sparingly. It's good that you still have some conscience. Anyway, I truly don't understand how you've gotten yourself into such a terrible situation. Your miserable self is the longest-serving mountain lord in the continent, but you've somehow got a crappy relationship with all of your colleagues. Disregarding that, even your crustacean subordinates dare to ignore your orders. Tell me, how was I so unfortunate to be born in your censer? Sight. I should find a better censer to reincarnate into in my next life." The child in red continued to grumble and complain. However, this didn't stop him from deftly climbing onto the incense table and diving into the copper censer that still had 7 sticks of incense inside. As he returned to Pillow Relay Station, Chang Shang discovered that the little boy next to him was gritting his teeth at times and heaving sighs at other times. It was as if he were contemplating a choice that would decide his survival. Li Huai finally stopped in his tracks. He mustered his courage and asked, "Old Cheng, I have 30 copper coins on me, so can we return to that bookshop and buy a book? How much is the cheapest book there? Will I still have any change left?" The man who had been referred to as Old Cheng didn't know whether to laugh or cry. After pondering this for a moment, he replied in earnest, "That's difficult. That bookshop is widely regarded as the most unaffordable in Red Candle Town. Unless it's a scholar who has a hobby of collecting rare books, few people ever go there to purchase books. If you really want to buy a book, I know 2 large bookstores on the east side of town. Confucian Classics, scripts from the myriad teachings, strange and miraculous tales. I can haggle good prices for you if this is what you're after." The stubborn little boy shook his head and replied, "No, it has to be from the bookstore we just visited." The 30 copper coins were Li Huai's secret life savings. More than half of it had been stolen from his uncle's family, while the remaining portion of it was from his sister, Li Lu. Earlier, Chen Ping'an hadn't tried to act generously at his own cost, buying the expensive book without question. Nor had he rejected Li Huai and shown an unwillingness to spend so many silver taels. Instead, he had asked Li Huai if he was going to read this book. This caught Li Huai by surprise. Even though he answered in the affirmative, he would naturally flip through this book in a casual manner when he was bored. Li Huai actually had little interest in this book, Severed Water Cliff. However, Li Huai was very happy that someone was willing to spend 10 taels of silver for him. Li Huai wasn't stupid. The little boy was well aware of whether someone was nice to him or bad to him. Pairs of straw sandals, the bookcase that he was about to receive, and this book Severed Water Cliff. He owed Chen Ping'an so much, so he naturally felt like he had to repay the favor somehow. Otherwise, he would feel guilty and uneasy. In reality, Li Huai didn't like Zhu Lu, nor was he especially fond of Lin Shuyi, someone who he had gone through thick and thin with. Instead, he found Li Baoping to be quite decent. This was the little girl who had frequently bullied him while at school. The person who Li Huai liked the most was the carefree and goofy Aoyang. As for the poor boy from Clay Vase Alley, Li Huai was a little afraid of him. Chang Sheng looked down and saw the serious expression on the little boy's face. Sure enough, he possessed an immortal aptitude, as that person had said. There were some fated opportunities that would indeed benefit one's mentality. The relay station deputy suppressed a smile. Perhaps he could help this little boy by giving him a slight nudge in the right direction. In the future, this might even turn into a profound favor that he could benefit from. When showing kindness to others, showing kindness to 1,000 mortals was oftentimes far inferior to showing kindness to a single immortal. This was something that he had personally heard about and personally witnessed. It was the absolute truth. Chang Sheng brought the little boy back to the alley between the 2 streets. The young store owner was sitting on the doorstep and looking at them with a wide smile on his face. It was as if he had anticipated their return. At the same time, a hunchbacked old man with a lantern in his hand walked toward Li Huai and Chang Sheng from the other side of the alley. The young store owner slowly stood up and waved his hand at Chang Sheng, saying, "The bookstore is closing up for the day. You can bring the little boy over another time." Chang Sheng immediately turned around to leave, not forgetting to take Li Huai with him. After confirming that the two of them had left, the graceful and refined young man immediately lost his demeanor of calm and composure. He appeared respectful and slightly uneasy as he cupped his fist in respect and said softly, "Rushing tranquil rivers, Li Jin pays his respects." The gray-haired old man stood in front of him with one hand behind his back and one hand holding his lantern. He nodded before stepping into the bookstore. The young man shuffled to the side to let him pass, after which he stood up and followed the old man inside. The old man casually slid the handle of his lantern under some books as he turned to face the handsome young man. He sighed with emotion and remarked, "You looked like this 40 years ago when I first met you, and you still look like this today. How enviable." Li Jin tightened his grip on his folded fan and replied with a faint smile, "To species like us, being able to live as humans is the greatest fortune that we can enjoy." The old man nodded and didn't offer a retort. "That group of people being able to stay at Pillow Relay Station, was this organized by you?" the young man asked in curiosity. The old man remained silent. Li Jin smartly kept his mouth shut. He had opened this small bookstore 100 years ago, and it was here where he observed the world with a cold gaze. He had seen all kinds of things and witnessed all kinds of tumult in the official courts. He was no stranger to the imperial court of the Great Li Empire. If one wanted to reserve so many good quality and medium quality rooms in Pillow Relay Station, one needed to at least be an assistant minister to one of the 6 ministries. Of course, this was ignoring the 3 palace ministers. Beneath the ministers and assistant ministers in the 6 ministries was the position of palace minister. This was someone who was responsible for overlooking the department subordinate to the ministries. The palace minister was a 5th-rank official served by external officials. Generally speaking, palace ministers and external officials weren't influential people. However, there were 3 palace ministers who were an exception to this rule, wielding unimaginable power. This was the merit inspection official in the Ministry of Personnel, the martial examination official in the Ministry of War, and the ritual official from the Ministry of Rites. These 3 officials didn't enjoy a high status, but they enjoyed immense power that drew much attention in the official courts. Once they were dispatched outside the capital, they would definitely enjoy special treatment and be viewed as provincial governors. One was responsible for the inspection and promotion of all local officials under the 4th rank. One was responsible for the selection and examination of martial artists in the empire, and more so responsible for the recruitment of martial artists from the cultivation world. One was responsible for the grand rituals of the empire, and was a frequent advisor to the emperor whenever he needed advice regarding the strategic direction of something. This seemingly low-ranked official was oftentimes a scholar from the Confucian schools or academies. The unremarkable old man standing before Li Jin was one of these 3 officials. 40 years ago, Li Jin had once gifted 2 books to a poor scholar heading to the capital to take the imperial exam. To his astonishment, this poor scholar was promoted time and time again, eventually becoming the palace minister of the Ministry of Rites Ritual Office. This was a lofty and influential position. To Li Jin, who was in the mortal world far away from the imperial court, however, there was another layer of meaning to this position. It was rumored that this small office that most officials couldn't even find the gates to was secretly in charge of choosing and appointing official gods of mountains and rivers. Even though this office didn't have the power to make the final decision, they did indeed possess the critical ability to recommend candidates. Li Jin had eventually learned of the old man's position through the officials and merchants passing through Red Candle Town. He had sent countless letters to him, yet it was as if these letters had all vanished into thin air, with none of them receiving a reply. Li Jin didn't dare to protest, and he could only stop sending letters in disappointment. For the past 100 years, the young man who called himself Li Jin had painstakingly tried to become the official river god of the rushing tranquil river. He had sacrificed a lot and tried to go through many avenues, yet all had ended up in vain. "You should know the reason why the rushing tranquil river doesn't have an official river god," the old man suddenly said. That's why I pretended not to see the letters you sent me. It's not that I don't want to help, it's just that I'm truly unable to. Li Jin smiled bitterly before nodding and replying, I understand. As long as the emperor doesn't agree, I'm afraid that even the words of the minister from the Ministry of Rights won't be of any use. The old man smiled and carefully observed the young man before him. This person would change his appearance every 2 or 3 decades. He squinted his eyes and continued. However, an opportunity sits before you now. It's completely up to you whether you dare to fight for this opportunity or not. The young man's face didn't light up in excitement and he instead asked, I heard that several new gods were appointed in Dragon Spring County, what was previously Zhuhou's small world. The emperor appointed a river god in the Dragon Whisker River, a river god in the Iron Talisman River, and a mountain god each in Cloud Drape Mountain, Lamp Bearer Mountain, and Downtrodden Mountain. He appointed 5 gods at once, 3 in the mountains and 2 in the rivers. This has already exhausted a huge portion of the emperor's accumulated wealth. If he's so stretched, how can he possibly spare a valuable position for the rushing tranquil river? Rest assured, this isn't some kind of conspiracy targeting you, the old man said with a smile. To put it bluntly, you're not powerful enough for me to personally target you. The young man felt slightly embarrassed and angry. However, realizing that he still had to depend on the old man for help, a look of helplessness quickly spread across his face. He didn't say anything else. The old man's expression became serious as he explained. With Red Candle Town as the center, all of the officially appointed mountain gods and river gods, and all of the candidate mountain lords and river guardians within a radius of 500 kilometers need to stand by and await further orders. They need to be prepared to participate in a siege at a moment's notice. In addition, the northern border passes including Yefu Pass have all dispatched large numbers of elite cavalry and sent out innumerable scouts and reconnaissance teams. As for you, Li Jin, I definitely wouldn't have revealed this information to you were it not for your gift of 2 books at that time. Your existence makes no difference at all. Li Jin was absolutely stunned. Why are they mobilizing so many forces inside the border of the Great Li Empire? What are they laying siege to? A single person, the old man replied honestly. Li Jin looked the old man in the eyes, and it didn't seem like he was lying. Palace Minister, is there anything you need me to do? He asked slowly. The old man smiled and replied, just a minor matter that should be well within your abilities. I simply need you to keep an eye on a man who's just arrived in Red Candle Town. Having come on shore from rushing Tranquil River for 200 years, I know that you've done quite nicely in Red Candle Town. You're more familiar with the waterways than the city gods, and you're more familiar with the customs and happenings in the small town than the 2 river gods. Moreover, if the records in the capital aren't erroneous, then you're even in possession of a few precious green darkness fish from the ancient books. These fish are especially suitable when it comes to investigation and secret communication in small areas. Li Jin's expression grew dark. Relax, the old man said in a taunting voice. I know that green darkness fish are 1 in 100-year treasures. However, I haven't stooped as low as to covet them yet. No, it's just me projecting my shortcomings onto someone else, Li Jin said with a self-deprecating chuckle. He paused for a moment before asking, and that person is? A man wearing a bamboo hat, the old man answered slowly. There's a small silver gourd tied to his waist, and he's also traveling around with a bunch of children. Those children are from Zhuhou's small world, or what's now known as Dragon Spring County. As for the man's true identity, the spies from the Empire haven't determined this yet. Li Jin was dumbfounded. That person came to my store just then. The old man's gaze became intense. It was just a coincidence, Li Jin said carefully. The old man waved his hand and warned, it doesn't matter. From now onward, remember not to give anything away. It's better to do nothing than to make a mistake. If you alarm him by accident, there's probably no need for you to worry anyway, because you'll most certainly be dead at that time. Even if he doesn't kill you, I'll make sure to personally kill you. If everything goes well, however, I don't dare to promise you the position of official river god of the rushing tranquil river. What I can do, though, is to get the emperor to remember your name first. Can this be considered as being known and appreciated by the emperor? Li Jin asked in self-ridicule. The old man stopped his act of randomly grabbing books and flipping through them. He turned around and asked, What, you're unwilling to take this risk? Li Jin roared with laughter and replied, fortune favors the bold. In any case, there's no need for me to personally join the fight, so this is a deal where I can only win and not lose. I accept your offer. He snapped his fingers, and two especially slender and exquisite fish materialized near his shoulders. Their senses were linked with his, and anything that they saw, he saw too. The fish swished their long tails and instantly vanished from sight. Before leaving, the old man smiled and remarked with emotion, the books in your store are still this expensive. Only at this moment did Li Jin see shadows of the impoverished young scholar from the old man. The old man retrieved his lantern and left the store. After exiting the alley, he came across a burly man with his arms crossed before his chest. The two of them continued side by side, and the burly man asked, you're not afraid of overdoing things? Since the net has already been tightened to this point, it won't make a difference even if Li Jin suddenly goes mad and decides to spit the truth to that Aoyang, the old man replied casually. At the end of the day, you're still trying to return the favor of him giving you 2 books? The man said with a huff. The old man smiled in conceit and said softly, no matter what, favors owed by me are worth a little something, right? Zhu Lu said that she wanted to eat some Donghua. Even though Zhu He was slightly puzzled. When did his daughter suddenly develop a sweet tooth? This wasn't an excessive request or anything. Thus he walked around with his daughter to look for a stall. After wandering around for a while, they finally came across someone carrying a large number of Donghua and loudly peddling his goods on the streets and alleys. Zhu He didn't like Donghua, but Zhu Lu decided to buy 3 skewers at once. This confused Zhu He again. However, the young girl smiled and said that one was for her, while the other 2 were for the young mistress and Chan Ping'an. She also said that she wanted to apologize to Chan Ping'an tonight. At the very least, she had to say sorry to him. Otherwise, she wouldn't feel at ease. Zhu He felt as if a weight had been taken off his shoulders. He was extremely happy at this moment. The 2 of them returned to the relay station, and they learned that Chan Ping'an and Li Baoping had already arrived back a while ago. Zhu Lu was yet to finish her Donghua as she walked to the courtyard of a good quality room. She asked her father to deliver a message to Chan Ping'an, telling him that she would wait for him here. Zhu He strode away, and he couldn't help but chuckle in his mind. His daughter was far too sensitive, no? What was so embarrassing about apologizing to someone? It wasn't long before a young boy in straw sandals appeared on the other side of the painted corridor. He slightly quickened his pace when he saw Zhu Lu sitting on the bench. There were a dozen or so pieces of candied fruit scattered on the bench next to the young girl. Zhu Lu smiled as she stood up, and she placed her hands behind her back in a seemingly shy manner. She walked toward the young boy. Something pressed down on Chan Ping'an's shoulder, causing his aura to immediately freeze. The wisp of sword qi in his acupoint had already been like an arrow at full draw that had to be fired. However, the slap on his shoulder had changed everything. This was like a ferocious python going out to hunt yet coming across a flood dragon. Its initially indomitable aura would naturally freeze and subside, and it would naturally choose to temporarily stop. Stop right there, a man with a bamboo hat said as he stood next to Chan Ping'an. He wrapped his arm around the young boy's shoulder and laughed. We're all one big loving family. Why fight and try to kill each other? How unseemly. Chan Ping'an looked up, and the man who came and went like a shadow smiled at him and said, believe me, I'm Aoyang. Chan Ping'an sighed and relented. All right, I'll listen to you for the moment. Aoyang simply glanced at Zhu He, and he didn't even spare so much as a glance for Zhu Lu. His voice was lazy as he explained. Using such a precious wisp of sword qi to kill the measly Zhu, he is an absolute waste of a divine treasure. Even if you don't feel distressed, I'll feel distress for you. Moreover, forget about it. Enough with this depressing talk. To sum it up, my conscience would ache if I didn't step in. Here's a qi channeling technique for you, the 18 stops. Just treat it as compensation. Chan Ping'an was just about to exit his stance. However, Aoyang let go of his shoulder and took a step back, shaking his head and remarking with a smile, your stance is far too crude and unrefined. I'll teach you something far more impressive. Aoyang looked at him and ordered, stand firm. He then bent a finger and tapped Chan Ping'an's shoulder. Afterward, his hand was lightning quick as it tapped his chest 7 or 8 times. At the same time, He used an immortal technique that was even more impressive than compressing one's voice into a thread. His voice directly sounded in the young boy's mind, saying, "Remember the starting point of this qi, and remember its path as well as the names of the acupoints it passes through. Like a snaking dragon vein, this wisp of qi rises from the ancestors of mountains Linchong. This is the first stop, and it's a paramount acupoint to nurture one's sword. After surging through 3 mountains in 6 passes, the qi arrives at the Fuji acupoint, the second stop. After dashing through 6 caves and 9 abodes, it arrives at the Chunyang acupoint, the third stop. And this is the last stop, giving 18 stops in total. The names and descriptions of these acupoints are vastly different from what they are today, and this is the result of immense effort and sacrifice from countless swordsmen from ancient times. You need to commit these to memory." In the end, Aoyang asked, "Have you remembered them?" Sweat formed on Chan Pingan's forehead and he replied, "I've remembered most of them." Aoyang smiled and said, "Remembering most of them is good enough. There's also no need to be afraid if you smash into brutal obstacles or challenges and bloody your face in the future. This is the path that every swordsman must take. Once you become familiar with the circulation path, you can attempt to slowly channel your qi. This is the most interesting aspect of the 18 stops. This is something that I, Aoyang, figured out. Some people are super impressed by this, and they heap praise on me and say that just this suggestion alone was able to elevate their sword skills to a lofty new height. Haha. This is a bit embarrassing." Chun Pingan suddenly felt like this so-called 18 stops was probably not much stronger than the mountain-shaking fist. Aoyang saw through the young boy's thoughts and he said seriously, "Do I look like a liar who makes empty promises? I, Aoyang, can never be accused of boasting to others." Zhuhou had already recovered the ability to think at this moment. However, his limbs were feeling even stiffer than before. A single movement would mean death. This was the only thought running through his mind. This was the formless aura of dominance radiating from Aoyang. When one was friends with this man who always wore a green bamboo saber and a small silver gourd by his waist, one would feel like he wasn't a powerful person no matter how one looked at him. When one became enemies with him, however, Zhuhou was drowning in fear and drenched in sweat. He felt as if his soul were about to explode. In the distance, Zhuhi's mental state had already collapsed. Nearby, Zhu Lu could only hear Chan Pingan mumbling to himself. Aoyang's voice sounded in Chan Pingan's mind again, teaching him, "The light boat passes tens of thousands of mountains, and the channeled qi flows through hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of miles in an instant. This is indeed very good. However, if one can slow down, like a mountain slowly building mass yet not accumulating height over 100 years, like a sea slowly gaining volume yet not rising in level, that will be even better. When channeling qi in the future, you can focus on familiarizing yourself with this path. You need to reach a state where your qi will automatically flow through this path, even when you're sleeping." "How would I know if I'm channeling the 18 stops when I'm sleeping?" Chan Pingan asked with a puzzled expression. Aoyang wrapped his arms across his chest and chuckled. "Wander to where the water ends and sit down to gaze upon the clouds when follow the flow of nature, and you'll naturally find the answer you seek." Aoyang sat down on the bench. However, his expression immediately became strange. Chan Pingan brought his hand to his forehead. Aoyang quietly stood up and used his hands to pat the sticky candied fruit from his rear. He then shuffled over and sat elsewhere, resting his hands on the railings as he exhaled a long breath. He finally looked at Zhu Lu for the first time, commanding, "Apart from returning the hero's gall pill and the purple qi guide to me, you and your father also need to hand over the stack of talismans you inherited from the Li clan. However, these talismans can only save one of you. Zhu Lu, I'll give you a choice now. Will you walk out of Pillow Relay Station alive? Or will your father?" Before Zhu Lu could reply, Zhuhi had already begged in a solemn voice, "Senior Aoyang, I earnestly beg you to let Zhu Lu leave. I'm willing to commit suicide to make up for our sins. In fact, there's no need to even soil Senior Aoyang's bamboo blade." Aoyang simply smiled as he looked at Zhu Lu with squinted eyes, completely ignoring Zhuhi, who had already retrieved the pill, immortal scripture, and talismans. "Zhu Lu, who do you want to live?" Her face was already filled with tears, yet she forcefully covered her mouth with a hand, not daring to make a sound. Meanwhile, her other hand was tightly clenched behind her back. so tight that her nails were drawing blood from her palm, leaving her entire hand crimson red. Zhuhou fell to his knees with a heavy thud, kowtowing to the man as he called in a quivering voice, "Senior Aoyang." Aoyang turned to Chen Pingyan and asked, "What do you say? Or perhaps we should release them both. I can cripple Zhuhi's cultivation base for you if you're afraid of him seeking revenge. If you're still afraid of unexpected accidents, I can even sever his lifespan with ease. I can do the same to Zhu Lu." Chen Pingyan didn't look at Zhuhi, and he only looked at Zhu Lu as he replied, "I said before, you have to die." Zhuhi suddenly looked up and roared, "Chen Pingyan, Zhu Lu's only a child." Chen Pingyan had been relatively calm the entire time, yet his face instantly became white with fury when he heard this. The young boy dashed forward, and he was just about to shatter Zhu Lu's chest with a single punch. Her aura was chaotic at this moment, and she was no better off than a mortal young girl. For some reason, however, his fist involuntarily opened up into a palm at some time, and its trajectory also took an upward turn. A vicious slap rang against Zhu Lu's cheek. Aoyang placed a hand on Chen Pingyan's shoulder again, saying, "That's enough." He chuckled softly and continued, "Some punishments are even crueler than a quick and simple death." Chen Pingyan returned to the long bench and spaced out. He had no clue how Aoyang had dealt with Zhuhi and Zhu Lu, nor did he have any clue how they had left Pillow Relay Station and where they would go in the future. He suddenly looked up and asked, "Aoyang, do you have any wine?" Aoyang smiled and replied, "Of course I do. My small gourd can hold 500 liters of wine. However, I have to warn you about something first. It's important that one doesn't drink when they're experiencing grief. Otherwise, it's extremely easy to end up as a pathetic alcoholic. However, one can drink when they're feeling happy and carefree. Perhaps drinking will even lead them to become a wine immortal." Outside Pillow Relay Station, Lin Shui stood by himself on the street. He wasn't sure why Aoyang had told him to stay outside, but Aoyang had said that he needed to wait for someone to arrive. At that time, he could then decide whether he wanted to enter the relay station or not. Even though he was bored out of his mind, the young boy still stood as tall and straight as a lone pine on the mountaintop. Borrowing the light from the large red lantern hanging by the door of the relay station, Lin Shui retrieved the Confucian scripture, recite a top cloud scripture, and started to read the characters that were hard to pronounce and understand. Whenever he came across concepts that he understood or achieved new enlightenment, however, he would feel sheer delight as if basking in the sun reappearing from behind the clouds and mists. The aloof young boy who had been shaped into the person he was by his rough life didn't want to share this sincere joy with anyone else. Lin Shui was never afraid to view the world and its people in the most negative light possible. An ordinary-looking woman walked over from the distance. There was amazement in her eyes when she saw the young boy, and she remarked with emotion, "Sure enough, this is someone with a brilliant aptitude for cultivation." The woman stopped half a dozen paces away from the young boy and said with a smile, "Hello, Lin Shui. We've already met once by the riverside. Me on the decorated boat and you on the bank. My true identity is the Grand Elder of the Greatly Empire's Palace of Eternal Spring. I'm not trying to boast, but I'm indeed the type of immortal that commoners and peasants look up to. I can summon wind and rain with a flick of my sleeves, and I can shake land and mountains with a stomp of my foot. I'm especially skilled at the 5 lightning righteous technique, and I can slay demons and spirits with the turn of my palm." After saying this, the woman chuckled to herself before waving a hand and saying, "No, this won't do. This kind of introduction is far too overbearing." However, Lin Shui nodded and said, "I believe you. I don't know what your father told you in his letter, and I more so don't know what Aoyang's intentions are." The woman chuckled. "However, since he chose to leave you outside the relay station even though he's aware that I've been following your group the entire time, I feel like I can give this a shot. I want to see if I can convince you to return to the capital with me. After farewelling your parents, you can then come with me to the Palace of Eternal Spring to cultivate." "My father told me to obediently stay in Red Candle Town," Lin Shui replied with a nonchalant expression. "Afterward, he said a powerful person would bring me to the capital with them. Otherwise, he wouldn't collect my corpse for me even if I mysteriously died somewhere. A dead person isn't worth the transportation fee. Father also mentioned that things are extremely dear in the capital right now, so the expenditure of the clan is quite large." The woman sighed and said, "Your father's words are indeed grating on the ear. However, is this not the truth?" A smile of ridicule tugged at the corners of the young boy's lips. The woman hesitated for a brief moment before extending a hand to Lin Shuyi and offering with a dignified expression, "Even though you might find this childish and nowhere near mysterious enough, lacking all kinds of ups and downs, sharp-witted exchanges and grueling tests, I still want to tell you this. Lin Shuyi, take a step forward, and you can set foot on the bridge to longevity." Lin Shuyi put his book away before shaking his head and replying, "Thank you for your offer and good intentions, immortal elder. I can't control what clan I'm born into, nor can I control what surname I'm given. However, I can control what path I take, and I'm well aware of what direction I should head in." What a shame! The woman could do nothing but sigh. She didn't try to force the young boy against his will, and she said, "Then till next time, Lin Shuyi. I hope you won't be filled with regret when we meet again." Lin Shuyi clasped his hands and bowed in respect, saying in a proper manner, "Lin Shuyi respectfully farewells immortal elder." The woman vanished in a flash. Inside the relay station, Chen Pingyan and Aoyang sat on benches opposite each other in the corridor. "Aoyang, are you about to leave?" Chen Pingyan asked softly. Aoyang nodded in reply. He raised his small gourd and took a swig of wine. It was clear that he had recalled a sad memory. As it turned out, his warning to Chen Pingyan about not drinking when feeling down was nothing more than an empty message. As he dazedly looked at the young boy, looked at his clean and pure eyes, it was as if he were looking at that pair of eyes from many years ago. "Aoyang, I've made up my mind. Studying is useless. It's far too annoying. I, Qijingchen, am going to travel the world with you. I'm going to repay kindness with kindness and violence with violence. I'm going to drink the strongest liquor, wield the quickest sword and ride the best horse. I've already prepared enough money, more than a dozen taels of silver. If this isn't enough, I can go back to borrow some from my master. Master is extremely understanding, and he said that I can go out and travel around if I genuinely don't want to study anymore. Knowledge lies everywhere in the vast stretches of mountains and rivers." The young scholar in green had been beaten black and blue by others, yet the look in his eyes had been especially pure and determined. An old scholar had snooped around the gates of the academy, not daring to show himself and only leaving his head visible. He had furiously gestured to Aoyang with his eyes, and when Aoyang ignored him, he had decided to step out and stand next to the gate. Rolling up his sleeves, he had gestured that he would fight to the death with Aoyang if he dared to trick his disciple. "Off you go. You've barely hit puberty, yet you're already talking so big. I'll take you to see the colorful world when you grow older and more mature. Then it's a promise, Aoyang. I'll wait for you." In the end, Aoyang had faced the young boy with his back, holding a sword in his hand and tapping it against his shoulder in a carefree manner. Waving his other hand that was clenched into a fist, he had bade farewell. The traveling swordsman Aoyang had bade farewell to the young scholar who dreamed of traveling the world. This farewell was an eternal farewell. In the end, he had turned around to see the young boy walking away as he held the old scholar's hand. The two of them were returning to the academy. The old man and young boy had been chatting with each other. "Jingchen, I forgot to ask before. Who beat you up?" "That person with the surnames Wa." "Huh? Him? He was that careless when he beat you up? I'll give him a good lecture when we get back. A virtuous person should settle disputes through reason and not violence. Was he unable to win through reason? Is that why he threw hands in a fit of shame and anger? No. He was willing to admit defeat after losing the debate. However, he purposely said that I would have no hope of ever surpassing you, master, no matter how many books I read. How is this possible, I thought to myself. Even though master is knowledgeable, you always become drowsy when you try to read now. I always see you nodding off while you're reading. However, I'm still young, so there'll eventually come a day when I read more books than you, master. Even so, he continued to mumble under his breath, and he said that I should become more knowledgeable than master in a day if I were truly so capable. I got angry when I heard this, so I ran over to hit him first. I couldn't beat him, and I'm willing to admit this fact. See, that's why I didn't DOB on him when I saw you just then. Scholars should naturally be moral characters who have backbones, am I right? Master, I reckon you're a bit lacking in this area. When you win the debate but lose the fight, you always boast about how profound your knowledge is and how incredible and historical the debate was. When you lose the debate but win the fight, however, you instead boast about how earth-shattering and gripping the fight was. Master, why are you twisting my ear? Ow, ow, ow. A virtuous person should settle disputes through reason and not violence. What virtuous person? Your master is a sage. Upon seeing this, the man had finally turned around to leave, with his movements carefree and dashing. During those long and tumultuous years, the man would sometimes sit atop that great wall and enjoy gulps of wine by himself. Small pieces of news and rumors would travel over from the distant stalactite mountain, with none of them being good news. It would be nightmare after nightmare. Listening to this news, the man would regret not bringing that young scholar with him. He would grumble about the old geezer and scold him for not even being able to look after his favorite disciple. And now, looking at the young boy before him, Young suddenly smiled. I once offered a comment to a young boy who was around the same age as you. I told him, "Believe me, you'll enjoy more success as a scholar than a swordsman." I feel like I should offer a comment to you as well now. Believe me, you'll enjoy more success with the sword than with your fists. Under his bamboo hat, Young wore a wide and brilliant smile, one that was like the warm sun on a cold winter day. However, Chan Ping'an had never seen such a sad Young before.